Well, I'm excited to be here. It is Passion Camp Reset Sunday. We have some special guests in the house. We have our 2026 Passion Campers right here to my right, to your left. We're really excited about having them with us today. We have 77 middle school and high school students, 11 small group leaders that got to spend a week at Daytona, and I could not be more excited to be a part of that trip. To be there, honestly, each and every year we've done Passion Camp. It's incredible, it's amazing, but not only that, we also have some mega special guests in the house this morning, and that is our most valuable costume winners for Passion Camp Squad Wars. Ella Rose Wilson and Lila Murchison absolutely dominated that competition. And I mean, there were 6,000 people that were dressed up, and these two were selected as having the most valuable costume in all the land. And can we give it up for them one more time? Just one more time. And not to be outdone by Megamind, but there was also this little guest we had this week. We like to call him Saucy Dawsey. It's Dawson Lindhaus. And his dad, we like to call him Dawson's dad, Barrett. He allowed for us, along with his mom, Hannah, Barrett's wife, to just spend some time with Dawson on the beach. And that's where most of the kids flocked, unless they were going around looking at a manatee situation that also happened on the beach that we're not going to get into because this is a PG type experience today. But what I love about camp and what I love about what we do is it just brings things together. And if you're a guest in the house, I'm Eddie, one of the pastors here, and I absolutely love these times on the calendar because it gives us a moment to kind of pull our students together and then just go 15 hours in one direction to just learn more, grow more, be underneath the influence of some incredible Christian just doctrine and teaching and worship and the small group times and all the different distractions that are eliminated just because we're there. And year after year after year, things are just kind of unique about this trip. And this trip is no different. Every year we've gone, there's been a special group that goes, and by special group, I mean the entire group that goes is unique. Every year there's a different set of volunteers, there's a different set of students. As a matter of fact, 10 days before we left, sadly, we had one student have to drop, and it was an all-access night that happened, and I went into our, what we call transit, and some of the girls were hanging out, and they were just kind of eating lunch or dinner or whatever, and I said, hey, does anybody want to go to Passion Camp? And one girl goes, I do. And I was like, cool, call your mom. And she called her mom. And within like 3 minutes, she was signed up for Passion Camp. We had the Sunday before we left, we had a student that was kind of on the fence. He had just some basketball stuff and some new school stuff and wasn't sure if he could go. And I was like, dude, we got to have you there. And he was like, cool, I'm going. We even had a student on Friday not be able to make it, sadly. But we were able to fill his spot with another student. We even had a small group leader not be able to go as well. But we were able to fill her spot. And all those things, all the reason why I say that is because it's always the right group that goes. It's never the wrong group any year, but it's always the right group, a different mix that God just kind of brings together. And we got to experience some incredible things while we were there. The theme of the camp this year was reset. And from the jump, like the beginning of just the kind of the opener video that we had was all about us getting back down to the foundational things of our faith. How important it is for us to lean into just who God is and what God's up to and why God matters so much to our lives and why we should be leaning into more and more to what God wants to do in and through us. And I brought some notes that I took, because I took a lot of notes, and our students did as well, by the way. They have their phones, they have their notepads, they have better handwriting than I do, so mine are all digital. But what's amazing is that we learned quite a few things about this faith we have in Jesus that I just want to make sure that they're aware of and that you guys are aware of as well. Just how the night sessions and the morning sessions went. So some recapping on that, we learned the first night that we should have a faith in Jesus. Our goal was to have faith in Jesus, for us to lean into him over all the other things. We learned the next morning that we should consider the heavenly things over the earthly things. That when it comes to what God is ultimately up to, our focus and our attention shouldn't be on the things that are down on the ground, but for us to look into the heavens and consider what God has to say. We learned on that second night that we should be a Christian. Like we are called to be, believe it or not, Christians. That's the label that we have been given. That no other label really matters in this world to us as followers of Jesus than just simply being a Christian. that we're to also consider the work that Jesus did for us. That by his dying and rising, we are to be and are a part of what God is ultimately a part of in this world. But beyond that, we are a part of the family of God. We are sons and daughters of the King, and we should be operating at that level each and every single day. And our focus on the work that Jesus did for us allows for that. We also learned on the next to last night's session that when it comes to our stuff, that we need to confess and expose the darkness. We need to get stuff out in the open. We need to realize that when you get stuff out into the light, God continues to bring more of who he is, and his salvation and his forgiveness and his grace and his mercy becomes something that we get to experience each and every day of our lives. And that's what we were kind of leaning into throughout that week at Passion Camp. And then we talked about the soils, right? Like Jonathan, this pastor, just really dug into the story of the soils, the good soils versus the rocky soils versus the not too deep, shallow soils, and how for us, we need to get our roots deep into those good soils. And we were challenged in that. We were encouraged to just lean into and let God do what only he can do in our lives, but for us to be fertile and to be open to change, open to the embrace of the good news of Jesus. Like that was such a good moment for me sitting there on that next to last morning. And then, of course, what it ultimately ended with, the last night session, was just us simply being sent. That we as followers of Jesus, we're not called to just give our lives away to Jesus and then just sit down. We're called to be sent out, to be a communicator of what God is ultimately up to in the world through what Jesus did. And we are to be gospel carriers out into the midst of all the things that we've been given as people on the planet Earth, no matter what your context, no matter where you are. And this was, in a little baby nutshell, Passion Camp. This was us. But as I sat there and I learned while these students were learning, and we had these incredible church group times and some questions that were being asked and brought around, and just, again, the notes that these students were taking, they were willing to share, and the encouragement in those moments, and the tears that were shed over God breaking hearts through small groups during our lunch times, all of that was absolutely unbelievable and valuable. But as I kind of left Passion Camp, there were two things that for me really were highlighted over the things that we kind of experienced as well. They really kind of pushed into my heart and challenged me to be more aware of what God truly is ultimately up to through camps like this, but honestly, through the lives that each of us are called to live. And it's an awareness that we need to be just more and more okay with as it relates to the life that God has given each of us. Because I'm convinced that there are two things that are super important for us to hold on to each and every day as a Christian. And the first one is this, that God is building a story. He's building a story in our life. But not only that, he wants us to go tell that story. And so for the next few minutes, what we're going to look at is story building and storytelling. That God is the author and perfecter of our faith. That he has given us all the template and all the work for us to lean back into what God is up to in our lives. And he wants us to simply go tell that story with the way we live our life and with the words that we can come up with as he continues to be more and more a part of our life. And the best way that I know to kind of describe what I was feeling after camp, this understanding of God as a story builder and we are a storyteller, is to look at someone who, honestly, this kind of was him. He was the ultimate story within which God was building something incredible. And he was the ultimate teller because he was someone that just was willing to say, okay, God, sure, you can use me. You can have your way in me. And it cost him tremendously, eventually his whole life. But he, from the moment he met Jesus, did everything he could to work his story and to tell his story in a way where God got the glory, got the honor, got the praise. And what I want to do is hopefully invite all of us into this understanding that these students experienced something incredible, but it's not something that's going to stay at camp. And it's not something that's just for the campers. It's for everybody who can and should understand what God's ultimately up to, which is he's a story builder and we are to be storytellers. And if we can lean into the story that I'm about to read you, that was written by the guy that actually experienced it, then maybe there's some things that we can take out of where we're going to go today into our lives, and that there can be some changes that we can see around us based upon what God ultimately wants for you to just simply say with your life. So we're going to be in Galatians chapter 1 today. We're going to look at the story and the life of the Apostle Paul, and we're going to just lean into the words that he had to say. My goal is to read to you about 13 verses, and I'm going to take some breaks throughout just to kind of break down a little bit about where he goes in this letter. He's writing to a group of Christians that are kind of funky in the faith. I don't know. They're kind of okay with Jesus and the gospel. And Paul is trying to get them to understand the importance of the value that the gospel that he's communicating with them is the true gospel. Matter of fact, he's kind of dumbfounded in the first 10 verses that these Christians are moving away from the gospel that he communicated with them. Paul spent years with these people, teaching them, coaching them, encouraging them, breaking down the words, giving them all these things, and he provides with them his story, like how he became a Christian, why all this matters, so that they will hopefully simply just trust that God is God, that Jesus is who he said he was, and that he can continue to just be the coach and the leader and the inspirer of the good news of Jesus for these particular people. And the hope for us is that we will understand how his story can be a reflection of our story, and how we need to be leaning into more of what God is doing and has done in our life so that we can make an impact on the people that we're the closest to and the people that we might not even meet ever in our lives, but they'll hear about us because of the story that our life is telling. So if you have your Bibles, be in Galatians chapter 1, beginning in verse 11, it says this: "For I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel preached by me is not of human origin. For I did not receive it from a human source, and I was not taught it, but it came by a revelation of Jesus Christ." This is Paul opening up a statement about the good news that he's been promoting and pushing for the last however many years he spent with them. We know he spent 3 missionary journeys there to out away from Israel, away through the Mediterranean rim, into Galatia, and back through, and then back again, because these people needed help coaching, love. And these people were really kind of moving away from the faith, and Paul's like, hey, listen, the gospel that I received, this is not of human origin. This is not a human-sourced material. This is not based on tradition. This was revealed to me by Jesus Christ. Matter of fact, you guys remember in Acts chapter 9, the gospel writer Luke writes this account of the early church, and in Acts 9, Paul is on his way to persecute and hopefully arrest and just wreak havoc all over the Christians in that area. And Jesus himself shows up, asks Paul a really interesting question: Paul, why are you persecuting me? Blinds him, and within 3 days he can see again, and now he is a follower of Jesus. And then Paul begins to explain what that actually looked like and why that mattered to the people in Galatia. Verse 13, he says this: "For you've heard about my former way of life in Judaism. I intensely persecuted God's church and tried to destroy it. I advanced in Judaism beyond many contemporaries among my people, because I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. But when God, who from my mother's womb set me apart and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I could preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone. I did not go up to Jerusalem to those who had become apostles before me. Instead, I went to Arabia and came back to Damascus." Paul, again, he's trying to defend his position as a pastor, as a leader, as an apostle. He's trying to let these people know that the gospel that I'm presenting to you is the legit gospel. And then he also says, hey, I've got some bad news in my story. Like, I was a persecutor and I tried to destroy the church of God. I thought my way was the right way. I thought this old way of seeing the law and the old way of the traditions of the elders was the way to do it, but no, I was dead wrong. And Jesus explained that to me with his face. And Paul says, hey, I'm writing to you and I'm communicating to you and I'm doing all this to you because I want you to know that I was the best of the best in that regard. And what's interesting is that the Galatian church was being overly influenced by a group called the Judaizers. They were trying to get these Christians to become more Jewish, pick up all the traditions, pick up all the rules, go back to the old ways, do all the law things. And Paul's like, no, what are we doing? This isn't the gospel of grace. This isn't what Jesus came to ratify and to fulfill. Like, this is a new thing. We have a new covenant in Jesus' blood, and we're not going back to the old way. I had the old way. Jesus explained to me with his mouth that I was doing it the wrong way. And now I'm promoting this new way with Jesus being the center of it. Please pay attention, you guys. Like, be in and around and a part of my story. He then even says something interesting too, that it was since he was set apart in his mother's womb. He begins to connect dots about how God had separated him and set him up to be a receiver of God's grace before he even knew about the gospel at all. And this is my thing. When it comes to your story in your life, when it comes to my story in my life, when it comes to these young people's stories in their lives, we need to begin to look back in how we've got to the present so that we can understand that God really is building a story that all he wants us to do is tell. And what Paul wanted to make sure that these Galatian Christians understood is that God was working in the details. He was trying to get his attention. And then in the moment that he gave his life away to Jesus, Paul looked back and said, God, you were doing all of this for my benefit, for your glory, so that I could get the good news, the gospel, out to the world. Because it's true. This was nothing that Paul came up with on his own. This was something that God had revealed to him in Jesus, and he's absolutely stunned by this. And he wants his friends to be stunned by the gospel of grace that they too have received, and not to revert back into this understanding that it's just not as it once was. No, it's better than that. Jesus is here, all of it's been fulfilled, and we're going to take a step up, and we're going to walk in all of this. This is Paul's message. But then he gives some historical details that he didn't go to Jerusalem to make mention of this to the other apostles. No, he went to Arabia. He went to another part of the Mediterranean in the Middle Eastern realm there, and he spent time, a lot of time, and I mean a ton of time. 3 years he spends just allowing the Spirit of God to pour over him. He spent 3 years in the scriptures just being absolutely worked over. He spent 3 years just letting God do what only God can do, giving him this realignment of his heart and his mind, just helping him get away from the old traditions of how he used to think and picking up the good news, new covenant gospel message. This was Paul's deal. And he spent 3 years. Have I said he spent 3 years? 3 years in this lab, this incubator of faith and grace and mercy and throwing away all the laws and the traditions and the old ways. It wasn't 3 months. It wasn't 3 days on the beaches of Daytona. It was 3 years he spent poring over and being a student of Jesus. And then in verse 18, it says, then after 3 years, I did go up to Jerusalem to get to know Cephas, who was Peter, Peter. And I stayed with him 15 days, but I didn't see any of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Verse 20, I declare in the sight of God, I'm not lying in what I write to you. Again, Paul has to defend himself. He has to provide a little bit more of the context of his story to these people because he wants them to trust him. Because what hangs in the balance is their true understanding of the gospel. That God has been writing a story in his life and writing a story for all of our lives to understand the importance to embrace the true communication of the gospel. That Jesus is who he said he is, and the work that he did on that Friday is enough to satisfy the wrath of God for our sins. And Paul was like, there is no other way. He said, but after 3 years of me being coached by the Spirit, being just overwhelmed by the scriptures and how it keeps pointing back to Jesus, that I got up and I went up to Jerusalem. And they say go up to Jerusalem because Jerusalem is on a higher elevation. And you literally walk up a hill / mountain to get to Jerusalem. And then he says, providing us a little bit of details, because he wants again to provide them with as much confidence in his words, that he had a conversation with Peter. And he spent 2 weeks with him. Can you imagine that conversation? So Jesus spends all this time with his disciples, all this time with his inner three, Peter, James, and John, and then he dies and rises from the dead, and Peter was there for all of it. Paul, he was on the other side of all that. He just happened to be at the right place, the right time, seemingly, and God was going to do what God only does, and he rescued him in a conversation in Acts chapter 9. And Paul and Peter are now trying to figure out how to get this good news out even more into the world that's desperate for the gospel. That God had been building Peter's story, and God had been building Paul's story. And now God is ready for them to go out and tell this story. But then Paul also communicates that he bumps into Jesus' brother James. That's kind of cool. James was one of the guys that was like, you know what, Jesus, maybe you need to tone down your ministry. Maybe you need to kind of pull back on the whole you're God thing. But then after Jesus died on a Friday and rose from the dead on a Sunday, James said, you are God. You are Messiah. You are the Christ. You are the one that is who he is. And if a brother of yours begins to worship you, you better have died and rose from the dead. because that's the only qualifier, I think, right, that might actually make that true for you. It would take a death and a rising, a predicted death and rising, for someone to look at their brother and say, you're God. That's where James was. That's where his brother Jude was as well. They were convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus is who he said he was. So these guys have a conversation and they're talking about it. And Paul wants to make it crystal clear. He's got his story in order. And he says, the reason why I'm telling you this is because I'm telling you guys, I'm not lying to you. I'm giving you the good news. I'm trying to give you the gospel. That what separated you from God was your sin. But now you've been brought back to God by the blood of Jesus, who died for your sins. And all he wants you to do is let him build your story, and then let that story be something you're willing to communicate. This is what Paul wants the Galatian church to understand, to get, and to hold on to. He then in verse 21, he just keeps going. He says, afterward, I went to the regions of Syria and Cilicia. I remained personally unknown to the Judean churches, which is the church around Jerusalem. They simply kept hearing, he who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of me. And I want to put that last little part up of verse 23. He who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith he once tried to destroy. That's Paul's story. Do you guys get that? That God had been working Paul in such a way, and moving in such a way, and writing and building Paul's story in such a way that it started to get out into the world because Paul wouldn't stop talking about what God had done in his life. Paul began to tell the story that God was building and allowing God to build the story he wanted to build in his life, which was more of Jesus and less of Paul. And he didn't even go to the churches around Israel. He stayed up north, hanging around the Mediterranean Rim, reaching all the Gentiles who were worshiping pagan gods and all the like. And Paul was like, not really worried about that. I hung out with you guys for all those years. And what's remarkable about this is that it shows to me just exactly what God is capable of, which is anything. He can do anything. He can take a destroyer of the church, a persecutor, and make him the primary preacher. He can take someone who couldn't care less about God and is doing everything in the anti-direction, rescue them, and now he can't help but and be willing to lay down his life for the Jesus who rescued him and saved his soul. What's also interesting is that we too have a story that God is trying to build in our lives. That he truly is trying to get us to understand and allow more of Jesus and less of the world and less of the culture and less of the this is what I want in our lives to be the story of our life. No, he wants us to just say, okay, well, God, how can I move you into the center of it all? And all the details we learned at Passion Camp with these young people and all the different things from being a Christian to digging into the soil of that good, nourished, well-rooted faith that we're supposed to have, to being sent out in the world, all those things are not just for these young people. They're for me and for you as well. But while we were there, God did the miraculous, like he always does. That there were a few students that on Monday night and Wednesday morning, I believe, gave their lives to Jesus for the very first time. And God had been building up their story, had been doing only the things he could be doing to get them at this point. And what's also kind of bananas about all of this is that they all got baptized while we were there at Passion Camp. But they got baptized because another one of our students who had been loving the Lord for a while just said, hey, Barrett, I want to get baptized in the Atlantic Ocean by Eddie. And Barrett ran that by me. And I honestly was a little hesitant because it's the Atlantic Ocean. And there are waves and there are things and it's not here. And I'm more of a rural guy. Anyway, I'm not going there. The point was, by Tuesday, I was all in. But by Thursday, he wasn't the only one that wanted to get baptized. These other three who had given their lives to Jesus did. Matter of fact, there was one, and we'll get to this in a second, there was one who on that Wednesday wanted to get baptized that Wednesday night in the dark. My man was ready to let everybody know that Jesus was his Lord and Savior. But God is doing the story building, and we are to be doing the storytelling. And I want you to see what we experienced at Passion on Thursday night. Check this out. That's kind of what it's all about. And what's amazing too, and we've got a picture of the four that got baptized. We've got Cooper right there in the middle. He was the one that was kind of the catalyst for this whole baptism thing. He, again, went to Barrett's like, hey man, I want Eddie to baptize me in the Atlantic Ocean. Barrett's like, all right, we'll get that done. And then Madeline, she was the one that 10 days before we left was willing just to raise her hand and said, hey, I'll take that spot. She didn't even think she was gonna be able to go to camp. She didn't think that this was going to be a part of her story. But God had other plans. God was building something different in Madeline's life and got that girl for the rest of forever. And then Evelyn was her friend sitting next to her. And Evelyn also wanted to be a part of camp as well. And we made that happen. And then Keegan was our Wednesday night, let's go and get this done guy. Baird had to really convince him to sell him on hanging out for just another day so we could all do this together. But you guys, this is what God has been up to within our student ministry for years after years after years. And this is God's business, is that he's still in the business of saving lives and rescuing people from death to life. And we're just a part of what God is a part of with this. But this doesn't just stay in middle school and high school. We are called to be a part of this story building and storytelling for the rest of our lives. It doesn't matter if you're 22 or 72, God is still writing and building your story. Are you going to be willing to tell it? And what kind of story are you willing to share with those that are sitting next to you? Those that are in your workplace, those that are in your community, those that you bump to at Kroger. Like, are you going to be willing to let God just, like Paul, just use you, be this voice? Because your story of your life, it's saying something. But how incredibly cool would it be if it was saying more of Jesus, more of what he's done for me, more of where I came from, more of how he keeps picking me up when I fall down, more of how, like those four, I went to Passion Camp. He changed everything for me. He saved me. He rescued me. I got to go public with my faith in Jesus because of that. And what's also remarkable of those four is how they even got to River City in the first place. Cooper, his girlfriend came here, brought him along. She moved to like Phoenix, Arizona. Dude's still here. Gets baptized. Madeline, again, she just raised her hand and said, hey, I want to go. 10 days before we left. We had a girl that was already ready to rock and roll and just couldn't make it. So, hey, she took that spot, gave her life to Jesus. Evelyn, her friends have been just here. She just keeps showing up. We keep loving on her on a Wednesday. And we got her there. And Keegan's had some buddies for the last couple of years just say, hey, man, just keep showing up on Wednesdays. Keep showing up on Wednesdays. Keegan's been helping out, getting here early, staying late, doing all the leadership-y type stuff. But what he didn't have truly was a relationship with Jesus. But that Wednesday morning, God got his heart. And we should be forever grateful for those stories. We should also be mindful about the fact that God is still writing a story in our life as well. And this is something that you guys, I want us to be aware of. That you are around people that are younger than you, that are looking to you to allow God to build your story so that you can simply tell them, hey, this is what God has done in my life. And this is what God can do in your life. Because we've got some seniors that are going off to college in like the next 30 minutes. And we need to be ready to help them and continue to be there for them when they come home on the weekends and in the summers. We've got a class of juniors that are about to become seniors, and I mean a full class of juniors that are about to become seniors that need to know that before they go off into the adult world, that they should be letting God continue to write so they can continue to tell that story. And all the other grades of all the other kids that went to Passion Camp and middle school camp and tomorrow kids camp, all these kids need to know the love of the gospel of grace that God has for us through Jesus. And it's us, it's me, and it's you who are called to be those people to set the story straight about what God ultimately is up to. But we have to be engaged. We have to be focused. We have to remember that list that I said to you earlier. We have to be okay with God just doing only what he can do in our lives. We have to be the storyteller that God has called us to be. But it takes intentionality, it takes humility, and it takes a willingness to say, yes, God, here I am, send me. And there was a question, and we'll be done after this, but there was a question that we kind of floated during our church group times. I did anyway, with our middle school students and our high school students. And it was a question that Jesus asked Martha, Lazarus's sister, one of Jesus's good friends who had passed away. And Martha was distraught. She was just beside herself that Jesus didn't raise him from the dead, or keep him from dying, I should say. And Jesus said, hey Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. And if you believe in me, you will not die when you die. And the question he asked her was, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe what I just read to you? Do you believe this? As a follower of Jesus, that he wants to continue to write the story and build the story in your life so that you can go out and tell it. Because if you do, it's a game changer. You will become a difference maker in your world, and you can start today with that. And what's remarkable is that when you're willing to be that's someone who's just believing the words of Jesus in real time, you're impacting generations that are coming after you that need to know desperately that this gospel that we have, it's not of a human source. It's been revealed by Jesus Christ, who sits on the throne and reigns forever and ever and ever. And there's a joy in this, there's a responsibility to this, and a privilege that goes beyond Passion Camp. So as we wrap up, I just want you guys to understand the importance and the value and the intentionality that we are called to be as Christians, to simply follow after Jesus and continue to pursue him with our whole hearts, because there is no other way for us to do this.